I'm now joined by Shalu Agrawal, Programme Lead at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, a leading policy research institute and think tank based in Delhi. Shalu's current research focuses on understanding the residential use of electricity in India, with focus on efficiency, smart metering, and both the supply and demand side of the power sector. Shalu, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
To start, I think, energy efficiency is often talked around as kind of that first fuel of sustainable energy systems, with the IEA and others, suggesting that efficiency alone could cut, up to 40% of our consumption over the next kind of 20 years. So what does this mean for consumers, for companies, and for countries as well, navigating this energy transition?
Right. Owen, as you said, energy efficiency is indeed the first fuel and is often called the cheapest form of energy, right? Saving a unit is often more prudent than generating another unit, even if it's from the most sustainable of technologies, especially when you take into account material costs, land costs, losses during the energy transmission, and so on. So after all, as they say, for lunches, there are no free power. So every unit of energy that doesn't need to be delivered has a multiplier effect throughout the economy, and there are savings to be had, in cost terms as well as emissions terms across the board. And to answer your question specifically, like, how consumers, companies, and countries stand to gain, well, the answers are pretty simple and out there. Well, as consumers, we stand to gain in terms of low energy bills. In countries like India, where, people often find energy difficult and unaffordable, it can even help improve the payment behavior. For power companies, for instance, they can avoid investments required to expand the generation, transmission, distribution network to meet the rising energy demand, and rather divert that investment towards strengthening the existing networks and provide better quality supply to the consumers, especially in the context of developing countries, I would say. And finally, for governments, there's a lot of scope of saving money in the form of investment needed for the infrastructure, but also lowering their subsidy bills. In many countries, there are huge subsidies on energy, and energy efficiency can help, lower these, significant amount of bills and free up the resources required for other developmental needs. So all in all, I think there's a lot to be had through energy efficiency, and we must definitely capitalize on it.
Sure. And I want to come back to that point you mentioned on government later, but it's clearly massively important, and we hear a lot about the technology side of things as we talk about the energy transition. But if energy efficiency really is this kind of low-hanging fruit, why isn't more being done on this? Why is it not a bigger issue?
Well, first of all, I would like by acknowledging that we are already trying to do a lot on it. Of course, there's scope to do more. For instance, there are efforts on research and development front. We are trying to improve product efficiency, trying to find solutions which are less energy intensive, or the more efficient processes in industry. We also have standard and labeling programs, across many countries, which are trying to make efficient products, enter the market and make them visible for the consumers. At the same time, there are also, efforts to run consumer awareness campaigns. But the fact is, given the potential at hand, we need to do more. Why we are not being able to do more? I think there are certain challenges, that need to be acknowledged. Unlike renewables, for instance, where few large companies can come together, mobilize capital for rapid deployment, the action on energy efficiency front needs to be highly distributed, because the agency lies, it itself is decentralized. So we're talking about billions of consumers, acting in the manner that we want them to act to, embracing energy efficiency. So the action is distributed, and when you have so many actors, you need more efforts. And from consumer perspective, I think there are three key barriers which are challenging. One, of course, is often the lack of awareness about both the technology and the benefits from it. Secondly, I think the high upfront cost, even if a relative, extra amount of money that you have to spend on that more efficient TV versus a less efficient TV can be a barrier to many consumers, especially when you know that the savings would be distributed over the long duration and you are not able to see them. So that invisible aspect is there. And finally, often these solutions are not available in the local markets, right? So in the cities and all, while they might be available, but not across the length and breadth of the countries. And the hardest and yet the most common barrier, I think, which we find often is simply inertia. When you don't have a compelling driver or need to act, why? When my fan is working fine, why should I change it to a more efficient one? So I would say, we need to solve for all of these barriers simultaneously, and this requires the right kind of policies as well as incentives. And another issue that slows down action on this front, I think, is the fact that energy efficiency being invisible, the political executives can't really boast about it. Like, while you may say that, okay, in my regime, we helped install so many gigawatts of solar or wind, energy efficiency is not that glamorous, politically speaking. In fact, former president of US, Mr. Barack Obama, he tweeted recently, a few months back, that efforts on energy efficiency front in his regime were one of the highlights which got unnoticed. So, how do we make energy efficiency societally, aspirational, so that even it can become politically attractive? So I think those are some of the questions that need to be answered.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I think we want to dig a bit more into kind of the work you've been doing. I know focused largely in India, and there has been some notable success through mandatory labeling. But again, some of these, I think by your studies, even showing kind of these are small steps. So interested to hear more about how we can educate people on both those cost and carbon benefits that you've been discussing around efficiency, and what role policy makers should play in this. So, ultimately, if you had a wish list for leaders in India or more widely, kind of what would be on there?
Right. So it's an important question. India's labeling program sort of goes back to 2006, right? So we already have around 10 appliances under mandatory labeling and 16 more under voluntary labeling. And, efforts are on to sort of expand this basket going forward. And based on the past successes, based on the past efforts, we have had some major successes. So I recently led this survey with around 15,000 households spread across 21 states in India. It's India's first residential energy consumption survey of a kind. And we find that, when it comes to appliances under mandatory labeling, for instance, air conditioners and refrigerator, a majority of our stock is already star labeled. So, relatively more efficient. Of course, we have to aim for more efficient products, and we're constantly ratcheting up our efficiency standards and MEPS labels, etc. But the success on front of appliances covered under voluntary schemes, for instance, ceiling fans, etc., it's been rather dismal, which is then sort of linked back to the fact that you then expect consumers to act on their own. They need to be aware about it because, it's a voluntary program. And in fact, we find that despite a lot of efforts on, campaigns to make energy efficiency and star labels prominent, just 1 out of 4, one of every 4th Indian is aware about the star labels. So, and the major gaps lie in small towns or in the rural areas, right? So that's where, a lot more action need to happen. And then the question comes, like, how do you go about educating consumers when it is indeed a very important step? And I think the answer to that is we really need to think about designing decentralized and consumer-centric engagement strategies where we can sort of explain to consumers the trade-off between upfront costs and the energy bill savings. I mean, we can't just dismiss them for being ignorant. They need to buy into the idea and they need to see the benefits for themselves. I mean, each of us is a consumer in that sense. So unless, if we see there is benefit in adopting something, I would definitely go for it. So it's on part of the policymakers and the stakeholders to make sure that consumers are able to see those benefits. And I think for that, the public representatives, the power companies, and especially the retailers who are, the people whom the consumer trusts the most when they're going for that last, mile purchase, they need to be at the forefront of, this discourse. And we need to leverage multiple channels, including, school curriculums, because you need to catch them young. After all, we are talking about sort of a societal change when it comes to how you view consumption overall. So, yeah. So in short, there's a lot we need to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fascinating. I think a lot of what we focused on is kind of on that consumer side and appliances and things like that. But when we look across sectors and
Yeah.
kind of increasing efficiency across sectors, kind of where do you think, holds most potential, at least at the beginning, or is this something that we should look to really push in all sectors of the energy transition?
Right. Pardon my bias towards consumer appliances because that's something that I, more closely work with. But I would say, given the urgency and the imperative of climate action, we need to act on multiple fronts across
Sure,
sectors. And let me just quickly talk about the three: buildings, of course,
sure.
industry, and agriculture. So, for instance, buildings, across the board, they account for nearly half of the total energy consumption. And that's why, a lot of focus is on buildings. In India, for instance, the share is 33%, but going forward, our building stock is going to rise immensely. And the consumption associated with building energy use will almost double in the next 2 decades. So we certainly need to focus on buildings where we have a huge potential for energy savings through promoting super efficient appliances, but also, through ensuring thermally efficient building stock, but also leveraging, new technologies like smart meters, to give those customized energy feedback to the consumer so that, they can adapt their behavior based on the information we are generating. On industry, I think it's definitely one of the hardest sector to abate, but offers, again, a very high potential for energy savings and material efficiency. Besides the opportunity to switch to, more cleaner fuels like natural gas and electricity. And here I think, again, from a developing country perspective, but also, across the world, I think we need to have a special focus on micro, medium, and small enterprises. And these account for a significant share of global employment as well as energy use. And often these are, these small enterprises are the ones which are bearing the highest energy cost and which affect in turn their profitability and productivity. And again, the constraints are not that very different because they, after all, are also consumers. So lack of awareness about the right kind of technology or processes that they can adopt, access to them, but also access to reliable and affordable capital. And that becomes one of the key constraints in this sector. And finally, coming to agriculture, which I think often people don't talk about when they're talking about energy efficiency, because in many countries, it's not that big a share of the total energy pie. But in the context of India and many other countries where agriculture is still a significant portion, it requires attention. For instance, in India, agriculture accounts for a sixth of total electricity demand. We have around 25 million electric pumps, but an additional 15 million diesel pumps, right? So it's a lot of energy that's being used, and most of these pump stock are very inefficient. So again, you have significant opportunity for energy savings if you could think about replacing them or, motivating people to adopt those permanent magnet motors. So motors, again, is a big sort of focus area of energy efficiency, I think, worldwide. And this is also important from a water energy nexus perspective. Again, we sort of silo ourselves when we think about energy, but energy use has an impact on water, and water use has an impact on energy. And we are constantly facing a lot of water-related challenges, crisis. South Africa, Cape Town had a 0-day sort of situation some time back. So efficiency of water use have implications on energy savings, which in turn can have implications for water savings. So I would like to stop there, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And we've started to kind of pick up on you started to pick at some of those global and regional differences. So we'd be interested to hear a bit more about that. How do you see this kind of efficiency conversation playing out in different parts of the world, developing, more developed, areas, and kind of what differences or commonalities are you seeing there?
Right. Well, I think going back to the first statement that I make, energy efficiency is an important fuel for every country, right? But of course, there are differences in the way savings potential is distributed across sector and what strategies would work in a given context, right? Because we are on different stages of sectoral development often. So for instance, let me give you an example. When it comes to buildings, in India, for instance, a lot of building stock is yet to be built, right? So we have a lot of opportunity ensuring that whatever we build now is, efficient and we are not locking ourselves into high energy consumption patterns. So our focus would be more on the new design and new purchases, whereas, you know, in countries like UK or US, a lot of your building stock is already built. So the focus would rather be on finding strategies to cost effectively retrofit, you know, the existing stock, which is often even harder. But while the objective is same, the approaches are different. Similarly, in case of appliances, like there's a lot of, you know, new purchases to be had in, you know, in the case of, say, kitchen appliances or some aspirational appliances, which are yet to penetrate many markets. So there we can really try to ensure that we have the best of the technologies available in the market. But often you also need to make sure that you're replacing or, you know, taking out the inefficient stock, for instance, the cash for clunker kind of schemes that were run in US some time back. So I think potential is there, but our approaches differ based on sector to sector.
Sure. And I guess the other point that's been kind of a running theme through a lot of this conversation is that need for capital. So, you know, how do we encourage investment in efficiency as we move forward?
Right. I think this is often the most difficult question to answer.
Sure.
I'm not a financial expert, so I will take a stab at it from my perspective. You know, of course, investment, again, needs to be attracted to all these sectors, but we need it to be directed at different stages of product development and distribution as well. So for instance, we do need a lot more research and development happening, you know, more than what we are actually doing right now. And, you know, a lot more money needs to be going there to get the products which are efficient. So for instance, the Global Cooling Prize, I mean, the finalists were very recently announced. It's a fantastic platform to stimulate research and investment into air conditioner, for instance, which are going to be, you know, the most important driver of energy consumption in buildings going forward. Similarly, once a product is developed, you need investment to take, you know, build those local supply chains and take those to the markets. So we need innovative business models, you know, at the distribution level to break that chicken and egg problem. Also lack of supply. So how do you push them? So, you know, aggregating demand. We tried this model in India. It worked really well in case of LED lighting. And now that model is being sort of adopted by many other countries. And finally, I think, you know, enabling financial products which are customized to the needs of the businesses, manufacturers, but also industrial consumers, you know, so that they can, I mean, it's easier for them and, you know, it's not burdening their already existing production cycles. And finally, I think we also need to ensure that, you know, investment is moving towards, you know, tapping the potential of material efficiency gains. We often miss that as well. You know, there's a lot of gains to be had through recycling and reuse of products and, you know, whatever material we have. So I think we need to leverage circular economy. So I guess I may have partly answered your question, but we'll try to do with that.
It's interesting. We've covered a lot in quite a short period of time. I think, you know, with all of this said, I think I'd be keen to hear from you kind of what your recommendations would be. You know, how do we get to that more efficient, low carbon energy system? Ultimately, Charlie, how do we get there?
Well, to answer you in short, I think we need to focus on the 3 A's, awareness, availability, and affordability, while keeping people at the center. A lot of our, you know, rise in energy demand is sort of tied to aspirations of billions of people for a better quality of life. We can't stop that from happening, you know, but we need to find ways to ensure that people are able to achieve their dreams without the consequent cost to the planet and our future generations. So we really need to be aggressive and leverage the power of collective action, because energy efficiency certainly requires participation from one and all. So that's my recommendation, I think.
Thank you, Charlotte, and a lovely place, I think, to end as well. That is all we have time for. Charlotte, we'll keep watching the work that you do, as well as that at the council as well. As always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, Warren, and we would love to stay in touch with you.
Thanks, Charlie.